I had just retired when my daughter-in-law told me, "You're free. Watch my 3 kids while I travel." She spoke like I existed to serve her. The phone call came 3 days after my retirement party. Tessa didn't ask how I was doing or congratulate me. Her tone was dismissive, entitled. "You do nothing now anyway," she said. "This is what grandparents do." I felt my chest tighten as I looked at the retirement savings statements on my desk, the travel brochures for my own dream trip. My family saw me as a servant, not a person. I spent 42 years working as a civil engineer for the state of Missouri, 42 years of early mornings and late nights, of weekends sacrificed for project deadlines, of promotions earned through merit and dedication. I started fresh out of college, drawing bridge plans by hand before computers took over. I watched technology transform my profession, and I transformed with it. I learned every new software program, attended every training session, mentored younger engineers who would eventually take my place. I gave that job everything I had. My wife Margaret and I built our life together on careful planning and delayed gratification. We lived modestly in Springfield, in a 3-bedroom ranch house we bought in 1986. We drove sensible cars. We clipped coupons. We skipped fancy vacations when our son Bradley was young, because we were saving for his college education and our retirement. Margaret worked as a librarian for 35 years. Together, we created a life of dignity and purpose. Margaret passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It happened fast. Too fast. One day she was complaining about back pain, and 6 months later I was sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand as she took her last breath. She was 62 years old. We were supposed to have decades together in retirement. We had plans. After she died, I kept working. What else was I going to do? The house felt empty without her laughter, without her humming while she cooked dinner, without her reading glasses perched on the end table beside her favorite chair. Work gave me structure, purpose, a reason to get up each morning. But 3 years later, at 65, I knew it was time. My body was tired. My heart was ready to finally live the dreams Margaret and I had shared. We had restored a 1973 Ford pickup truck together. It was Margaret's idea, actually. She saw it rusting in a barn outside of town and fell in love with it. We spent 3 years bringing it back to life, working in the garage on weekends. She learned how to sand and prime. I rebuilt the engine. We painted it a deep blue that reminded her of the Pacific Ocean, a place Shed always wanted to see. My retirement plan was simple. I was going to take that truck on a cross-country road trip. I was going to visit all the places Margaret and I had circled on maps over the years. The Grand Canyon, Yellowstone National Park, the Pacific Coast Highway. I had a small wooden box on my dresser containing some of her ashes, and I planned to scatter them at each location, keeping my promise that we'd see those places together. I'd been planning this trip for months. I had reservations at small motels along the way. I'd mapped out scenic routes. I'd even splurged on a new camera to document the journey. I was leaving in 10 days. And then Tessa called. My son Bradley is 38 years old. He works in finance for a private investment firm in Clayton, an upscale suburb of St. Louis about 200 miles from Springfield. Hes, a senior analyst, makes a good salary, lives in a neighborhood where the houses start at $800,000. He married Tessa 5 years ago. She comes from money. Old money, the kind that builds wings on hospitals and has streets named after them. Tessa has never worked a traditional job. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer. She has an Instagram account where she posts pictures of her perfectly decorated home, her designer clothes, her organic meals arranged like art on expensive plates. She has maybe 15,000 followers, which she considers a career. They have 3 children. Harper is 7, a bright little girl with Bradley's brown eyes. Colton is 5, energetic and funny. Baby Iris just turned 18 months old. I love those children with my whole heart, but I barely know them. I see them maybe 4 times a year, always on holidays, always at Bradley and Tessa's house. Tessa claims they're too busy with activities and social commitments to visit Springfield. She says the drive is too far for the children. I've noticed things over the years. The way Tessa looks at my flannel shirts like they offend her. The comments she makes about my simple lifestyle, my dated furniture, my truck that's older than Bradley. Once, she was looking through family photo albums and said Margaret's taste was quaint, which I knew was just a polite word for something less kind. But I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to cause problems. Bradley seemed happy. The children were healthy. That's what mattered, right? The phone call that day went exactly like this. Tessa didn't waste time on pleasantries. August, Bradley and I are taking a trip to Europe and Asia. We're doing Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Tokyo, and Bali. 6 weeks total. We leave in 5 days. You'll need to come stay at our house and watch Harper, Colton, and Iris while we're gone. Not a question. A statement. I tried to process what she was saying. 6 weeks? Tessa, I don't think I can do that. I have plans. What plans? Her voice was sharp with irritation. You're retired. You have nothing but time now. This is what grandparents do. August. They help out. Bradley and I need this trip. We've been under so much stress. We deserve a break. I attempted to explain about my road trip, about the reservations I'd made, about Margaret's ashes. She cut me off. You can do that anytime. You're retired. The rest of your life is free time. This trip is important to us. The tickets are non-refundable. Everything's already booked. Something in her tone made me pause. You booked a 6-week international trip without asking if I was available first. Why would I need to ask? You don't have a job anymore. You don't have responsibilities. This is your responsibility now. Taking care of your grandchildren. I felt something shift inside me. It was a small shift, like a gear clicking into a new position. But I felt it clearly. What about the children's schedules? I asked, trying to stay reasonable. She launched into a list. Harper had violin lessons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, tutoring on Wednesdays, soccer practice on Saturdays. Colton had swimming lessons, playgroup, and speech therapy twice a week. Iris needed to stay on her strict organic diet. Her nap schedule couldn't be disrupted, and she had Mommy and Me music class on Friday mornings. You'll need to follow everything exactly, Tessa said. I'll leave detailed instructions. And obviously, all meals need to be organic. I have specific brands. The house cleaner comes on Mondays. The lawn service is Thursdays. You'll need to be there to let them in. I was starting to understand. She didn't just want me to watch the children. She wanted me to run her entire household like hired help. Tessa, I said carefully, this is a big ask. I'd need to cancel my own plans, leave my home for 6 weeks. Have you considered compensation? Or at least reimbursing me for my expenses? The silence on the other end lasted maybe 3 seconds, then she laughed. Actually laughed. You want us to pay you to spend time with your own grandchildren? That's sad, August. Really sad. Most grandparents would be grateful for the opportunity. Most grandparents would jump at the chance to bond with their grandkids. But I guess that's the difference between people who understand family and people who don't. The words hit me like a slap. I looked around my kitchen, at the simple life Margaret and I had built, at the dignity Wed maintained, even when money was tight, at the values Wed tried to pass down to our son. Let me think about it, I said quietly. I'll call you back. Think about it, her voice rose. August, I don't have time for games. I need an answer. We leave in 5 days. I need to know you're doing this. I said, I'll call you back. She sighed dramatically. Fine, you have until tomorrow morning. But honestly, August, I expected better from you. This is family. Family helps family. I thought you understood that. She hung up before I could respond. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that phone call. The afternoon sun came through the window, warming the old Formica countertop. Everything was quiet. That's one thing about living alone. The quiet becomes its own presence. Sometimes it's peaceful, sometimes it's suffocating. I made myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. I'm not particularly tech-savvy, but I know enough to manage my finances online. I pulled up my bank accounts, my investment statements, my pension information. Margaret and I had been careful with money our entire marriage. We maxed out our retirement contributions every year. We kept our expenses low. When Margaret's life insurance paid out after she died, I invested most of it conservatively. Between my pension, Social Security, Margaret's remaining accounts, and our savings. I had approximately $1.2 million in assets. The house was paid off. I had no debt. It wasn't a fortune, not by Clayton standards, but it was substantial. It was a lifetime of sacrifice and discipline. It was Margaret getting up at 5 in the morning to work the early shift at the library so we could save on childcare. It was me packing lunch instead of eating out with colleagues. It was both of us driving cars until they had over 200,000 miles on them. I opened the file containing my will. Eid updated it 2 years after Margaret died, once the grief had settled enough that I could think clearly about practical matters. Bradley was listed as the primary beneficiary. Everything would go to him. It seemed natural. He was my only child. I wanted him to have security, to know his father had provided for him even after death. But sitting there that afternoon, I started thinking about Bradley differently. I started remembering things I'd pushed aside. When Margaret was dying, Bradley visited twice in 6 months. He lived 200 miles away, not 2,000. He had a good job with vacation time, but he came once right after the diagnosis, stayed for 3 hours, and then came again 2 days before she died. He missed the funeral because Tessa had encouraged him to attend a work conference in Chicago. Your mom would understand, Shed told him. This is important for your career. At the time, I was too numb with grief to be angry. Now, thinking back, I felt the anger rise. I remembered other moments too. Last Christmas, I drove to Clayton with presents for the children. I'd saved up and bought Harper a bicycle, Colton a train set, and Iris a beautiful wooden rocking horse I'd found at an antique store. When I arrived, Tessa's parents were there. Their gifts to the children were extravagant. A miniature electric car for Colton. A designer playhouse for Harper that cost more than my monthly pension. My gifts looked shabby in comparison. The children barely acknowledged them before moving on to the expensive toys. I remembered Harper's 6th birthday party. Tessa had rented an event space, hired entertainment, served catered food to 50 people. My invitation had arrived 3 days before the party. An afterthought. When I gave Harper a homemade photo album I'd put together with pictures of her from birth to age 6, Tessa glanced at it and said, "How sweet. How very August of you." I remembered the Thanksgiving when Tessa suggested I might be happier in a senior living community. They have activities, Shed said. Social clubs. You wouldn't be so isolated. Don't you get lonely in that big house all by yourself. Bradley had just looked at his phone, saying nothing while his wife implied, I should sell my home and move into institutional care. I opened my email and found messages from my younger brother, Frank. Frank is 62, 3 years younger than me. He lives in Seattle, works as a marine biologist studying orca populations in Puget Sound. He got divorced 5 years ago, no kids, and he's been living his best life ever since. He travels for research, goes on sailing trips, lives in a little house near the water. Frank had been sending me emails for months, inviting me to visit, to go out on research boats with him, to actually see the Pacific Northwest. Come live a little. August, his last email said. Margaret wouldn't want you sitting in that house being sad. She'd want you on the road, seeing the world you two dreamed about. I also found emails from 2 organizations I'd been supporting with small donations. One was the American Cancer Society, where I donated monthly in Margaret's memory. The other was Bright Futures Education Fund, a charity that provided scholarships and resources to underprivileged children. It'd been giving $50 a month to each. Modest amounts, but consistent. I clicked through to their websites and read about their work, the cancer research they were funding, the children they were helping get to college. Real work. Important work. Work that mattered. I looked at the photos of Margaret. I kept on the bookshelf. There was one from our wedding day, both of us impossibly young. One from Bradley's high school graduation, Margaret beaming with pride. One from our 40th anniversary, just 2 years before she got sick. We'd gone out to dinner at a nice restaurant. Nothing fancy, but nice. She wore a blue dress. I wore a tie. We held hands across the table like teenagers. I remembered something she said to me near the end. The cancer had spread to her brain by then, and sometimes she got confused. Sometimes she forgot where she was. But one afternoon she was lucid and clear. and she took my hand and looked at me with those green eyes I'd loved for 43 years. "Don't let them take your light, August," she said. "You're a good man, the best man I've ever known. When I'm gone, you live for both of us. You hear me? You live." At the time, I thought she was just talking about not being too sad, about moving forward. But sitting there that afternoon, I understood she meant something deeper. She meant, don't let people diminish you. Don't let people use you. Don't mistake doormat for kindness. I slept on it that night. I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about Harper's voice when she called me Grandpa, about Colton's laugh, about baby Iris reaching her chubby arms up to me. I loved those children, but loving them didn't mean I had to accept being disrespected by their mother. The next morning, I called my attorney, Linda Hartwell. Linda had handled my will, the probate after Margaret died, and various other legal matters over the years. She's sharp, practical, and doesn't sugarcoat things. "Linda, I need to change my will," I said. There was a pause. "August, are you okay? Has something happened?" "I'm fine. I've just realized I've been leaving my life's work to people who don't value me as a person. I want to redirect my legacy to people and causes that actually matter." We made an appointment for that afternoon. Linda asked if I was sure, if I wanted to think about it more. I told her I'd never been more certain of anything. I called Tessa back exactly 24 hours after her demand, as Shed insisted. Id spent the morning with Linda, signing the new documents, making everything official and legal. My voice was calm, even warm when Tessa answered. "Iv thought about your request." I said, "I won't be available to watch the children. I have plans that are important to me. I'm taking the trip Margaret and I always dreamed about." The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds before she erupted. "Are you serious right now? Are you actually serious? We've already paid for everything. The hotels, the flights, the tours. Do you have any idea how much money is on the line here?" "I understand that's frustrating," I said evenly, "but you made those plans without asking if I was available first. You assumed it'd be at your disposal. That was your choice. Our choice? This is about family, August. This is about helping out when you're needed." I suggested several options. I continued. "You could hire a professional nanny. You could adjust your travel dates to something shorter. You could take the children with you. These are all viable solutions. A nanny for 6 weeks." Her voice had gone shrill. "Do you know what that costs? And we can't take them with us. This is our vacation, our time together. Adult time. You're being selfish. You're being a bad grandfather." I felt the sting of that accusation, but I didn't let it shake me. "Tessa, I'm 65 years old. I just retired after 4 decades of work. I've raised my child. I've fulfilled my responsibilities. I'm not refusing to ever help with the children. I'm refusing to cancel my own plans to accommodate yours at the last minute with no consideration for my life." "You're alone and bitter," she said, and her voice turned mean. "That's what this is really about. You're jealous that Bradley and I have a good life, a happy marriage, beautiful children. You can't stand to see us enjoying ourselves while you sit in that depressing little house feeling sorry for yourself." I took a slow breath. "Stay calm," I told myself. "I need to go," I said. "I hope you have a wonderful trip, Tessa. However you work it out." "No. You know what?" Her voice went cold. "Fine. Don't help, but don't expect to be part of this family anymore. Don't expect birthday invitations. Don't expect holiday visits. Don't expect to see your grandchildren. You want to choose yourself over family? Then live with the consequences. We're done." She hung up. I sat there holding the phone, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for what this might mean for my relationship with my grandchildren. Relief that Id stood my ground. An hour later, Bradley called. For a brief moment, I hoped maybe he was calling to support me, to tell me he understood. That hope died quickly. "Dad, what the hell?" His voice was tight with anger. "Tessa just told me you refuse to watch the kids. You can't do that. We need you." "Bradley, I have plans. I've had these plans for months. If you'd asked me in advance, maybe we could have worked something out. But you can't expect me to drop everything with 5 days' notice." "Drop everything?" You're retired. You have nothing to drop. This is what retired people do. They help out. They spend time with family. Why are you being so difficult about this? Difficult. I felt my own anger rising now. Son, am not your built-in childcare service. Am a person with my own life, my own plans, my own dreams. Your mother and I saved and sacrificed for 40 years so we could travel in retirement. She died before we got that chance. I'm finally doing it. For both of us. Can't you understand that? I understand that you're being selfish, Bradley said. I understand that when your family needs you, you're choosing yourself. Mom would be disappointed in you. That hurt worse than anything Tessa had said. Don't, I said quietly. Don't you dare tell me what your mother would think. She's the one who told me to live my life after she was gone. She's the one who made me promise not to just exist, but to actually live. Whatever, Dad. Do what you want. Just don't call us when you're old and need help. Don't expect us to drop everything for you. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen and let myself feel it. The pain, the rejection, the heartbreak of having my only child turn on me like this. I let myself cry, something I hadn't done much since Margaret died. Then I wiped my face, made myself dinner, and went to bed early. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. I packed the truck carefully. Clothes, camping gear, the camera, maps, Margaret's ashes in their small wooden box. I stopped the mail, set the thermostat, asked my neighbor to keep an eye on the house. I also met with Linda Hartwell one more time to sign the final version of the new will. The assets would be distributed as follows. Frank would receive 40%, the American Cancer Society would receive 30%, and Bright Futures Education Fund would receive 30%. Bradley would receive $1. A legal strategy, Linda explained, would prevent him from contesting the will by claiming I'd simply forgotten him. Are you absolutely certain? Linda asked one final time. This is a major decision. I'm certain, I said. I'm leaving my legacy to people who will appreciate it and use it to do good in the world. The day before I was supposed to leave, a courier arrived at my door with a certified letter. It was from Holbrook and Associates, a law firm in Clayton. I opened it with a sense of dread. The letter was formal and threatening. It claimed that I had made verbal commitments to provide childcare services, that Bradley and Tessa had relied on these commitments in making their travel arrangements, and that my refusal had caused them significant financial and emotional damages. They were demanding $15,000 in compensation for canceled trips and alternative arrangements. I read it twice, feeling my blood pressure rise. Then I called Linda. She answered on the second ring. August. I need you to read something, I said, and I photographed the letter and sent it to her email. 2 minutes later, she called back. I could hear the anger in her voice. This is absurd, she said. This is harassment. You never signed anything. You never made any binding commitment. This is a bully tactic to intimidate you into compliance. What do I do? You do nothing. I'll handle this. I'm going to send them a response making it very clear that any further harassment will result in a countersuit for emotional distress and legal fees. This is outrageous. True to her word, Linda sent a response that same day. I don't know exactly what she wrote, but whatever it was, I didn't hear from Holbrook and Associates again. That night, I did something I'd been putting off. I blocked Tessa's number. I left Bradley's number unblocked, hoping maybe he'd come to his senses eventually. But I wasn't holding my breath. The next morning, I loaded the last of my things into the truck, locked up the house, and started driving west. The first few hours of driving were therapeutic. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed being on the road, watching the landscape change, feeling the rumble of the truck's engine beneath me. The old Ford ran beautifully. All those weekends Margaret and I had spent restoring it had paid off. I drove through the Ozark Mountains, taking the scenic routes instead of the interstate. The late spring weather was perfect. Trees were full and green. Wildflowers bloomed along the roadside. I rolled down the windows and let the fresh air fill the cab of the truck. I stopped for lunch at a small diner in a town whose name I can't remember. One of those places with checkered tablecloths and a menu that hasn't changed since 1970. I ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and it reminded me of meals Margaret used to make. The owner, an elderly woman named Dorothy, came by to refill my coffee. She noticed the truck through the window. "That's a beautiful Ford," she said. "1973? Yes, Mom. Restored it with my late wife." Something in my voice must have invited conversation because Dorothy sat down across from me. The diner was quiet, just a couple of other customers. "Where are you headed?" she asked. I found myself telling her everything. About Margaret, about retirement, about the phone call from Tessa, about the will, about driving away from my only child because I refused to be treated like help. Dorothy listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and patted my hand. "Honey," she said, "blood doesn't make family. Love and respect do. You're doing the right thing. It's hard, but it's right." Those simple words meant more to me than she could have known. I continued west, crossing into Kansas. The landscape flattened out, becoming endless fields and big sky. I spent the night at a small motel and called Frank, August. His voice was full of genuine warmth. "Where are you?" "Kansas. Heading toward Colorado." "You actually did it. You left. I'm so proud of you, brother." I told him about everything that had happened. Frank listened, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Bradley's an idiot," he finally said. "But he's not a lost cause. Give him time. Hell, figure out what he threw away." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm done waiting around hoping my family will treat me like a human being." "Good," Frank said. "Live your life. That's what Margaret would want." "Everyone keeps telling me what Margaret would want," I said, and I heard the edge in my own voice. "You're right," Frank said gently. "Sorry. What do you want, August? That's what matters." I thought about it. I want to finish this trip. I want to scatter Margaret's ashes in beautiful places. I want to feel like my life still has purpose and meaning. I want to stop feeling guilty for having boundaries. "Then that's what you do," Frank said. "And hey, when you get to Colorado, let me know. I can fly out and meet you for a few days if you want company." The offer touched me. I'd like that. Over the next week, I made my way through Colorado. The Rocky Mountains were spectacular. I hiked trails, took photographs, breathed in the thin mountain air. Frank flew into Denver, and we spent 4 days together exploring. It was good to be with someone who knew me, who remembered Margaret, who didn't need me to be anyone other than myself. We hiked up to Alpine Lakes. We sat around a campfire and talked about our childhoods. Frank told stories about his research with the orcas, about swimming in the cold Pacific waters, about the majesty of watching those massive creatures breach. "You know what you should do," Frank said one night. "When you're done with this trip, come to Seattle. Stay with me for a while. I could use your help with something." "What kind of help?" "I've been trying to start a scholarship program for underprivileged kids who want to study marine biology. Kids who have the passion but not the resources. I've got some funding, but not nearly enough. You're good with numbers, with planning. You could help me set it up properly." I thought about it. "That sounds worthwhile." "More than worthwhile," Frank said. "It's legacy building. It's making a difference that lasts beyond us." After Frank flew back to Seattle, I continued west. I reached the Grand Canyon on a perfect morning in early June. I stood at the rim and looked out at that impossible expanse of rock and time and history. Margaret and I had talked about coming here for 30 years. We had watched documentaries about it, read books, imagined what it would be like to see it in person. I found a quiet spot away from the crowds. I opened the small wooden box and scattered some of Margaret's ashes into the canyon. The wind caught them and carried them down into that vast space. "We made it, love," I said quietly. "I wish you were here to see it with your own eyes, but I'm seeing it for both of us." I stayed at the canyon for 3 days, hiking different trails, watching the light change throughout the day. I felt Margaret with me, not in any supernatural way, but in the sense that I was living the life we'd planned together. I was keeping my promise. I sent photos to Frank. I didn't send any to Bradley. His silence had made his position clear. From the Grand Canyon, I headed north toward Utah and then Wyoming. Yellowstone was next on the list. I was driving through southern Wyoming, enjoying the wide open spaces, when I stopped at a rest area to stretch my legs and check my email. I had a message from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line said, "Urgent, regarding Bradley Henderson." I opened it with a sense of unease. The email was from Patricia Whitmore. She introduced herself as Bradley's supervisor at Whitmore Financial Group in Clayton. She apologized for contacting me this way, but she'd gotten my email from Bradley's emergency contact information. She needed to speak with me about a confidential matter concerning Bradley. She provided her personal cell phone number and asked me to call at my earliest convenience. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number. Patricia Whitmore answered on the second ring. Her voice was professional, measured, careful. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for calling me back so quickly. Please, call me August." "What's happened? Is Bradley okay?" "Bradley is physically fine," she said, "but I need to discuss some concerns with you. First, I want to assure you this conversation is confidential. I'm calling you as a courtesy and out of genuine concern for Bradley's well-being. I appreciate that. Please, tell me what's going on." Patricia explained that she'd been Bradley's direct supervisor for 3 years. She described him as talented, detail-oriented, someone who had risen through the ranks quickly. But over the past year, she'd noticed changes. He seemed distracted. He was making unusual decisions with his personal finances. Had taken out significant loans against his future commissions. Had maxed out credit lines the company offered to senior employees. "We conduct routine audits of all employee accounts," Patricia said. "Nothing intrusive, just standard compliance checks. During Bradley's recent audit, we found some irregularities. Nothing illegal or unethical in terms of client accounts. But his personal financial situation is concerning." "How concerning?" She hesitated. "I can't share specific numbers, but he appears to be in significant debt, has been taking on extra clients, working evenings and weekends, which we initially thought showed initiative, but now we're wondering if it's desperation." I felt my stomach drop. "He lives in Clayton, in a house that must be worth close to $1 million. He drives a Range Rover. His wife posts pictures of their vacations to Europe. How can he be in debt?" "That's exactly the question," Patricia said gently. "Sometimes people get caught up in maintaining an image that exceeds their actual means. It happens more often than you'd think, especially in affluent communities where there's pressure to keep up appearances." I thought about the 6-week trip to Europe and Asia, about Tessa's designer clothes and the children's private school, about the house that probably had a mortgage large enough to choke a horse. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because Bradley listed you as his emergency contact. Because the firm is requiring him to work with a financial counselor, and we thought family support might help. Because I've worked with Bradley for 3 years, and I've seen him become increasingly stressed and unhappy, and I don't think he has anyone to talk to about it." After the call ended, I sat in that rest area for a long time. I tried calling Bradley. It went straight to voicemail. "Son, I just spoke with Patricia Whitmore. I'm worried about you. Whatever's going on, we can talk about it. I'm your father. I love you. Please call me back." He didn't call. I continued to Yellowstone, but my mind was elsewhere now. I went through the motions of visiting geysers and hot springs, but I couldn't fully appreciate them. I kept thinking about Bradley, about the pressure he must be under, about how he'd gotten into this situation. I spent a week in the Yellowstone area, staying at a small campground, hiking during the days, sitting by the fire at night. I scattered more of Margaret's ashes near Old Faithful, at a quiet spot by a river where the morning light came through the pine trees like something from a painting. Frank called to check on me. I told him about Patricia's call. "You can't save him from himself," Frank said. "You can offer support, but he has to want to change. He has to want help." "I know," I said. "But he's my son, and you're his father," Frank said. "Not his ATM, not his backup plan. His father. There's a difference." From Yellowstone, I headed west into Idaho and then Oregon. I was making my way toward the Pacific coast when I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. The message was a photo of my house in Springfield. Just my house, taken from the street. No caption, but underneath the photo was a message. "Nice place. Would be a shame if something happened to it while you're away." My blood went cold. I immediately called the Springfield Police Department and explained the situation. They sent an officer to check on the house. Everything was fine. No signs of tampering or damage. Then I called Linda Hartwell. "This is criminal intimidation," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Forward me that text right now. We're filing for a restraining order." Linda worked fast. By the next day, Shed tracked the phone number to a prepaid cell phone registered to Garrett Pemberton, Tessa's younger brother. I vaguely remembered meeting him at the wedding. Head seemed rough around the edges, out of place among Tessa's refined family. Linda did some digging. Garrett had a criminal record. Petty theft, vandalism, one arrest for assault that got pleaded down. Had been borrowing money from Tessa and Bradley for years. "They sent him to intimidate you," Linda said. "That's conspiracy. That's serious." The police issued a warning to Garrett. Linda filed for a protective order. I changed my locks remotely through a service and had my neighbor do daily checks of the property. But the damage was done. I now knew how desperate they were, how far they were willing to go. I reached the Oregon coast and checked into a small motel in a town called Bandon. I was sitting on the deck watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean when my phone rang. It was a number I recognized, Bradley's cell phone. But when I answered, it wasn't Bradley's voice, it was Harper. Grandpa August. Her voice was small, scared. "It's me, Harper." My heart clenched. "Harper? Sweetheart, what's wrong? Mommy and Daddy are fighting." She was crying now. "They're fighting really loud. Mommy said we might have to move. She said we can't afford this house anymore." Daddy broke a plate. It scared Colton. Hess crying too. Iris is crying. "I don't know what to do. Can you come home? Please, Grandpa? Can you help us? Harper, where are you right now? Are you safe?" "I'm in my room with Colton and Iris." We locked the door. "Mommy and Daddy don't know I have her phone. I found it in the kitchen." "Okay, baby. Listen to me. You did the right thing calling me. But I need you to hang up now and call 911 if you feel unsafe. Do you understand? If you're scared, you call 911. I just want you to come home," she sobbed. "I want you to make them stop fighting." Then the line went dead. I tried calling back immediately. The phone was off. I tried Bradley's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called Linda. "I need you to do a wellness check. Now, send the police to Bradley's house." My granddaughter just called me terrified. Linda made the calls. Within 30 minutes, she called me back. The police went to the house. Everyone is physically safe. There was a domestic disturbance, but no violence. Just arguing. Bradley and Tessa were both embarrassed. They assured the officers everything was fine. "It's not fine," I said. "Those children are terrified." "I know," Linda said gently. "But there's nothing you can legally do from Oregon." The police checked. "The kids are okay. That's all we can ask for right now." I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about Harper's scared voice, about Colton crying, about baby Iris caught in the middle of whatever hell her parents had created. By morning, I'd made my decision. I packed up the truck and started the long drive back to Missouri. It took me 3 days to drive from the Oregon coast back to Missouri. I pushed hard, stopping only for gas and a few hours of sleep at cheap motels. I called Frank and told him what was happening. "Do you want me to come with you?" he offered. "No," I said. "This is something I need to do alone." I arrived in Springfield on a Thursday evening. My house was fine. My neighbor had been checking on it regularly, and there was no sign of any trouble. I showered, changed clothes, and got back in the truck. Clayton was 200 miles northeast. I made the drive that same night, arriving around 10 o'clock. Bradley and Tessa's house looked exactly as I remembered it. Large, imposing, perfectly landscaped. Lights were on in several windows. I could see the flickering glow of a television through the living room curtains. I sat in the truck for a moment, gathering my courage. Then I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Bradley answered. He looked terrible. His hair was unwashed, he hadn't shaved in days, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt, Nothing like the pressed shirts and tailored suits I was used to seeing him in. Dad. He just stared at me. What are you doing here? Harper called me, I said. I came to make sure the children are okay. He looked like he might close the door in my face. Then his shoulders slumped and he stepped aside. Come in. The inside of the house told a different story than the manicured exterior. Moving boxes were stacked in the hallway. The expensive furniture was still there, but there were gaps on the walls where artwork had been removed. The house had the feeling of a place being dismantled. Tessa appeared from the kitchen. She looked as bad as Bradley. No makeup, hair in a messy ponytail, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt. The Instagram perfect influencer was gone, replaced by a woman who looked exhausted and defeated. August, she said. Her voice was flat, empty of the usual edge. Tessa. An uncomfortable silence filled the space between us. Finally, Bradley spoke. The kids are asleep upstairs. They're fine. The police probably told you that. I needed to see for myself, I said. Well, now you've seen, Tessa said. But there was no fight in her voice. She sounded resigned. Bradley ran his hands through his hair. You might as well know. We're losing the house. The bank is foreclosing. We have 30 days to be out. The words hung in the air. I looked around at the expensive furnishings, the high ceilings, the chandelier that probably cost more than my truck. How? I asked simply. Bradley and Tessa looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Bradley gestured toward the living room. You should probably sit down. We sat on the expensive leather sofa that would probably be repossessed soon, and they told me everything. It started small, Bradley explained. When they first got married, Tessa came from money, but her family had cut her off financially when she married Bradley. They didn't think he was good enough for her. So Tessa and Bradley had been determined to prove them wrong, to show that they could live even better than her family. Bradley made good money, around $150,000 a year, which is nothing to sneeze at, but it wasn't enough to support the lifestyle they'd adopted. The house payment alone was $6,000 a month. Add in car payments, private school tuition, the lawn service, the house cleaner, Tessa's wardrobe, the constant need to keep up appearances, and they were burning through over $200,000 a year. They'd been financing the gap with credit cards, home equity loans, and borrowing against Bradley's future earnings. They kept thinking he'd get promoted, that Tessa's Instagram would take off and bring in sponsorship money, that they'd somehow grow their way out of the debt. Instead, the debt grew. It compounded. Interest piled up. They robbed Peter to pay Paul, shifting balances from one card to another, taking out new loans to pay off old ones. The Europe and Asia trip was going to be financed entirely on credit, $75,000 for 6 weeks of luxury travel they couldn't afford. But Tessa had convinced Bradley it was necessary. They needed content for her social media. They needed to show people they were still living the dream. We thought, if we could just keep the image going a little longer, Tessa said quietly, something would break our way. Bradley would land a huge client. He'd get a big sponsor. Something. How much? I asked. How much debt are you in? Bradley's voice was barely above a whisper. About $320,000, not including the mortgage. I felt dizzy. $320,000. It was unfathomable to me. Margaret and I had never carried debt beyond our mortgage, which we'd paid off in 20 years. And the house? I asked. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage? Bradley said. The foreclosure is already in process. We can't stop it, even if we wanted to. We don't have the money to catch up. Where will you go? We found an apartment, Tessa said, in Kirkwood. 3 bedrooms, nothing fancy. It's all we can afford. $1,700 a month. What about the children's school? They'll go to public school, Bradley said. We already enrolled them for next year. Harper's upset about leaving her friends, but she'll adjust. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I saw the shame in his eyes. The defeat. The embarrassment of having to admit all of this to his father. Bradley, why didn't you tell me things were this bad? Tell you. A bitter laugh escaped him. Dad, you don't even like Tessa. You think we're materialistic and fake. How was I supposed to come to you and admit you were right all along? I'm your father, I said. You could have talked to me. Could I? Really? Bradley's voice rose now. Every time I saw you, I felt your judgment. Every time Tessa posted something on Instagram, I wondered if you were rolling your eyes. You've made it pretty clear what you think of our life. I made it clear I didn't want to be taken for granted. I said, that's not the same thing as not caring about you. Tessa spoke then, and her voice was different than I'd ever heard it. Soft. Broken. I was horrible to you, August. On that phone call. How I spoke to you. What I said about Margaret, I was horrible. Tears were running down her face now. Real tears, not the practiced kind. I've been living in a fantasy world, she continued. Playing house with money we didn't have, pretending everything was perfect on social media while our real life was falling apart. I treated you like you were beneath us when the truth is we're the ones drowning. I'm so ashamed. Of everything. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. To say I told you so. But looking at them, looking at the wreckage of the life they'd built on sand, I just felt sad. Where are the children right now? I asked. Upstairs with a babysitter, Bradley said. We're paying her $20 an hour we don't have because we didn't want them to hear us talking about all this. Can I see them? Bradley nodded. They'd love that. I went upstairs. The babysitter, a teenager from the neighborhood, was reading in the hall outside the children's rooms. I knocked softly and opened Harper's door. She was in her bed, a nightlight glowing softly. When she saw me, her face lit up. Grandpa August, you came. I sat on the edge of her bed and she threw her arms around me. She felt so small, so fragile. I could feel her heart beating fast against my chest. I came as soon as I could. Sweetheart, are Mommy and Daddy going to be okay? I chose my words carefully. They're going through a hard time right now, but they love you very much. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but they're working on fixing them. We're moving, she said, to a smaller house. I won't have my own room anymore. I have to share with Iris. That doesn't sound so bad, I said. You'll get to spend more time with your baby sister, I guess. She was quiet for a moment. Grandpa? Are you still mad at us? I was never mad at you, honey. Not ever. I could never be mad at you. I checked on Colton, who was sound asleep clutching a stuffed dinosaur. I peeked in on baby Iris, peaceful in her crib, then I went back downstairs. Bradley and Tessa were sitting together on the couch, and something in their posture told me they'd been talking. Bradley looked up when I came in. Dad, I need to say something. He stood up, and I could see he was trying not to cry. I've been a terrible son. You worked your whole life. You lost Mom. You deserve to enjoy your retirement. And I treated you like a resource instead of a person. When you said no to helping us, I should have respected that. Instead, I chose Tessa's anger over your dignity. I chose our fake life over my relationship with you. I'm so sorry. I felt my own eyes filling with tears. I changed my will. I said quietly, I need you to know that. You're not inheriting anything. I've left everything to Frank and to charities. Bradley nodded slowly. I understand. I deserve that. But, I continued, am not going to let my grandchildren suffer for your mistakes, and am not going to abandon my son when he's actually taking responsibility for what he's done. I sat down in one of the chairs facing them. I'll help you, but on my terms, and things are going to be very different from now on. My terms were clear and non-negotiable. First, Bradley and Tessa had to complete a financial counseling program, not just attend a session or two, but fully commit to learning how to budget, how to live within their means, how to rebuild their credit. They had to prove they could stick to it for at least 6 months. Second, they had to find housing they could genuinely afford. The apartment in Kirkwood sounded appropriate, but I wanted to see the budget that supported it. I wanted to see proof they could pay rent, utilities, food, and basic expenses on Bradley's salary alone, without going into debt. Third, Tessa had to delete her social media accounts. All of them. The Instagram that had driven so much of their financial ruin, the Facebook where she performed her perfect life, everything. She needed to stop living for an audience and start living in reality. And she needed to get a real job. Something with a steady paycheck, benefits, normal hours. Fourth, family therapy. All of them, including me. We needed to rebuild trust. We needed to learn how to communicate without resentment and judgment. We needed to figure out how to be a functional family again. Fifth, and most important to me, I would not be an on-call babysitter. I would be a grandfather who sees his grandchildren regularly, on a schedule that works for everyone. I would help with childcare when genuinely needed, emergencies, or important events, but I would be asked respectfully, and my own plans and my own life would be honored. I was not their backup plan. I was their father and grandfather, and I deserved to be treated as such. In return, I offered to help them, not immediately, and not with money just handed over. But once they proved they could manage their finances responsibly, once they showed me 6 months of living within a budget, I would consider helping with a down payment on a modest home, something they could actually afford, something realistic. Bradley and Tessa agreed to everything. They didn't argue or negotiate. They were too broken, too exhausted, too desperate for a lifeline to do anything but accept. The next 6 months were transformative. Bradley and Tessa moved into the 3-bedroom apartment in Kirkwood. It was in a nice complex with a playground and a pool. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe and appropriate. The children adjusted faster than anyone expected. Harper started at her new public school and discovered she loved it. Her class was bigger and more diverse than her private school had been. She made friends quickly. She joined the school choir. Without the pressure of keeping up with extremely wealthy children, she seemed lighter, somehow. Happier. Colton thrived too. He played with other kids in the apartment complex every afternoon. He learned to ride a bike in the parking lot. He was just a regular 5-year-old kid, not a status symbol. Baby Iris didn't care where she lived as long as she was loved and fed and had toys to play with. Tessa got a job as an administrative assistant at a dental office. It was 40 hours a week with health insurance and 2 weeks of vacation. Shed never had a traditional job before, and I think she was shocked by how much work it actually was. But she was good at it. She was organized, friendly with patients, efficient. Her boss loved her. Without social media, Tessa changed in ways I wouldn't have predicted. She seemed more present with her children. She read to them at night. She played board games with Harper. She wasn't constantly thinking about the next post, the next photo, the next performance. She was just being a mom. Bradley took on extra work teaching financial literacy classes at a community college on Saturday mornings. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Here he was, teaching people how to manage money after nearly destroying his own life through financial recklessness. But his students didn't know his history. They just knew he was knowledgeable and passionate. And honestly, I think teaching those classes helped him process his own mistakes. He used himself as a cautionary tale, always changing details but drawing on real experience. Bradley and Tessa stuck to their budget religiously. They tracked every dollar. They packed lunches instead of eating out. They shopped at discount stores. They learned to live on $80,000 a year instead of $200,000, and they found out they were actually happier. I saw the children regularly, not every week, but often. They came to Springfield once a month and spent the weekend with me. I taught Harper how to fish at a lake near my house. I showed Colton how to use basic tools in the garage. I read stories to Iris and watched her take her first real steps in my living room. I helped with childcare occasionally. When Tessa had a work emergency and needed someone to pick up Colton from school, I drove up and did it. When Bradley had an important client dinner and they needed an evening sitter, I came over and made the kids dinner. But these were requests, not demands. They asked respectfully. They gave me notice when possible. They thanked me every time. Bradley and I talked on the phone every Sunday evening. He told me about work, about the kids, about how he and Tessa were doing in therapy. I told him about the rest of my road trip, which I finally completed that fall. I scattered the last of Margaret's ashes at the Pacific Ocean and felt her approval in the salt air and crashing waves. I told Bradley about the scholarship fund I was setting up with Frank. The Margaret Henderson Memorial Scholarship for underprivileged students who wanted to study marine biology. Frank and I had worked out the details. It would provide full tuition, books, and living expenses for 2 students each year. It was funded through a trust Id established with part of my savings. After I died, more money from my estate would continue funding it in perpetuity. "That's beautiful, Dad," Bradley said when I told him. "Mom would love that." "She would," I agreed. She always believed education could change lives. 6 months after our confrontation in Clayton, I met with Linda Hartwell again. I signed a new will. This one was different from both previous versions. The scholarship fund would continue to receive ongoing support. Frank would still receive a portion. The cancer research charity would still get support. But Id added a provision for Bradley and Tessa. If they maintained financial stability for 5 consecutive years, they would receive a modest inheritance. Not enough to make them wealthy, but enough to help secure their future. Maybe $100,000 to put toward a house or the children's education. It was conditional. It required them to keep proving they'd changed, but it acknowledged that people can grow, can learn, can become better versions of themselves. I also established an education trust for Harper, Colton, and Iris. Money that would pay for their college education, regardless of what happened with their parents. That money was locked away and protected. Bradley and Tessa couldn't touch it even if they wanted to. It was for the children, period. Linda looked over the new documents and smiled. "This feels right," she said. "Conditional grace. Earned redemption. That's good." 1 year after that terrible phone call from Tessa, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house in Springfield. The whole family came. Bradley, Tessa, and the 3 children arrived Wednesday afternoon. They brought food, helped me cook, cleaned up together. We ate turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes at my old dining room table. We said grace, and Bradley asked if he could say a few words. His voice shook as he thanked me for not giving up on them, for teaching them what family really means, for showing them that accountability and love aren't opposites. After dinner, Harper asked me to tell stories about Grandma Margaret. I pulled out the photo albums Id kept in the hall closet. The children gathered around as I showed them pictures of a different time. There was Margaret on our wedding day, looking impossibly young in her simple white dress. There was Margaret pregnant with Bradley, glowing and beautiful. There was Margaret and me standing in front of the house Wed just bought, both of us grinning like Wed won the lottery, even though we were scared to death about the mortgage. There was Margaret holding baby Bradley in the hospital. Margaret teaching Bradley to ride a bike. Margaret at Bradley's high school graduation, crying happy tears. Margaret and me at our 40th anniversary dinner, still holding hands like teenagers. "She was so pretty," Harper said softly. "She was beautiful," I corrected. "Inside and out, she was the best person I ever knew." Tessa was watching me with the children, and when our eyes met, she said quietly, "You were right about everything, August. Real wealth isn't money. It's dignity, respect, and knowing your worth." "I'm so grateful you taught us that before it was too late," Bradley added. "You taught me the hardest lesson, Dad. That love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. That boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to healthier relationships. I'm trying to teach that to my kids now. To stand up for themselves. To know their worth." That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea. The house was full of sleeping grandchildren and my son and daughter-in-law. It was the fullest the house had felt since Margaret died. I pulled out the journal where I sometimes wrote letters to Margaret. Id started it after she died, a way to keep talking to her, even though she was gone. I wrote, "I finally finished our trip. My love, I scattered your ashes in all the places we dreamed about. The Grand Canyon at sunrise, Yellowstone by the river, the Pacific Ocean with the waves crashing on the rocks. You were with me every mile. But more importantly, I found my backbone again. I remembered what you always told me. That being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. That loving someone means expecting them to love you back with actions, not just words. Our son lost his way for a while, but he's finding his path now. Hez becoming the man we raised him to be. The grandchildren are thriving. Tessa has changed in ways I never thought possible. And me? I'm living again, not just existing. I think you'd be proud." I closed the journal and looked around my simple kitchen. The same kitchen where I'd received that phone call a year ago. The same kitchen where Id made the decision to stand up for myself. I thought about everything that had happened. The pain of being treated like a servant. The courage it took to say no. The fear of losing my relationship with my grandchildren. The heartbreak of my son choosing his wife's demands over his father's dignity. The long drive across the country, scattering Margaret's ashes and finding myself again. The shocking revelation about Bradley's financial crisis. The decision to help, but only on my terms. And then I thought about what Eid learned. I spent 42 years building a life of dignity and hard work. When I retired, I almost let my family convince me that my worth was measured by how much I could serve them, not by who I am as a person. I learned that retirement isn't about becoming invisible or being available for everyone else's convenience. It's about honoring the life you've built and living with purpose. I learned that real love requires boundaries, that saying no to disrespect isn't selfish, it's necessary, that children learn what we tolerate, and I wasn't going to teach my grandchildren that it's acceptable to use people. Most importantly, I learned that it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. Whether you're 65 or 95, you have the right to be treated with respect. And if people in your life can't offer that, you have the right to rewrite the story. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. My legacy isn't just the money I leave behind. It's the lesson I taught my family about mutual respect, about accountability, about the difference between helping and being exploited. Margaret always said our light doesn't dim by honoring ourselves. She was right. And now, finally, I'm living in a way that would make her proud. That makes me proud. If there's one thing I want people to hear in this story, it's this. Your worth isn't determined by how useful you are to others. It's inherent. It's yours. And defending it isn't selfish. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. You can be loving and kind while still having boundaries. You can help your family while still maintaining your dignity. You can say no without being cruel. You can stand your ground without burning bridges. And sometimes, the people who push back the hardest against your boundaries are the ones who need them most. They need to learn that relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided service. They need to learn that love is a two-way street. Bradley and Tessa needed to hit bottom before they could rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth instead of appearance. They needed to lose everything to understand what actually mattered. And I needed to be willing to let them fail in order to give them the chance to genuinely succeed. That's hard. It's one of the hardest things a parent can do. To watch your child struggle and not immediately rescue them. But rescuing them would have just prolonged their suffering. It would have enabled more bad choices. It would have taught my grandchildren that consequences don't matter as long as someone bails you out. Instead, I helped them learn. I set clear expectations. I held them accountable. And I rewarded their growth and change with support and encouragement. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up early and made coffee. I sat on my back porch, watching the sun come up over Springfield. The November air was cold, but not bitter yet. The sky was clear. My old truck sat in the driveway, still carrying the memory of all those miles Margaret and I had traveled together. Inside the house, my family slept peacefully. In Seattle, Frank was probably up already, heading out to watch the orcas. In clinics and research facilities, people were working on cancer cures funded partly by Margaret's legacy. In classrooms somewhere, students were learning marine biology, with scholarships made possible. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Harper. I love you, Grandpa August. Thank you for teaching Mommy and Daddy to be better. And thank you for showing me that being strong means being kind but not letting people be mean to you. I smiled. That 7-year-old girl understood something it had taken me 65 years to fully grasp. The cicadas would sing their evening song later. But for now, the morning birds were calling. A new day, a new chapter, a life lived with purpose and dignity. I was at peace. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Where you had to set a boundary with someone you love, even though it was painful? How did you handle it? What did you learn? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've dealt with family expectations and finding your own worth. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about real people facing real challenges and finding their way through. And please share this with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who's struggling with boundaries, someone who's being taken for granted, someone who needs permission to value themselves. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope it reminded you that you're valuable, you're worthy of respect, and it's never too late to stand up for yourself. May you find the courage to honor your own life, and may you always remember that kindness and boundaries can coexist beautifully. Take care.